Yes.
Yes. May we have your attention, please? Please direct yourselves to the back as we start. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Disabled American Veterans, and I'd like to thank Terry and the Fox family for inviting us all here today to celebrate the life of our good friend and loved one, Gary Fox. We're going to start off with a guest speaker, Professor Frederick Schuzer. I'm sorry if I messed up your name.
Yes. I thought there was a microphone
Yes.
down here.
There is right here. There's one right here.
Yeah. Penny?
There's a microphone
Oh,
right here.
okay. Yeah.
Take it off the lectern. Not that mic, not that mic.
Major Gary Fox, United States Air Force, retired of Lee Summit, Missouri, slipped the surly bonds of earth on September 23, 2023. Gary was born April 2, 1936, in Buffalo, New York, to Almond Kenneth Fox and Margaret Alberta Long. He graduated from Tonawanda High School in 1954, enlisted in the United States Air Force January 1955. He married Mary Stefania Moscow, and 7 children were born. Gary John with Deb, Susan Rose, Carolyn Marie, David Matthew, wife Christine, Mary Kathleen, Robert Allman, and Rebecca Ann. He's a proud graduate of Officers Candidate School, Class 60B. That's before they had OTS. Responsible for the pioneering of using computers in the field of communications, satellites, and missiles. His last assignment was Chief of Command Control Communications for the Strategic Air Command, SAC Airborne Command Post, Looking Glass Aircraft in Omaha, Nebraska. He graduated in 1974 from the University of Nebraska and continued graduate studies in industrial psychology. He moved to Lee Summit, Missouri in 1982 and continued working in the computer industry, including a 20-year ownership of Foxware Computer Systems in Lee Summit. He met and married Terry Jo Starkovich in 1983. Together, they were very active in personal, educational, and community services and boards centered around flying, education, safety, and his military career. As a private pilot with single-engine, multi-engine, and instrument ratings, he was happiest when flying his 1959 Piper Tri-Pacer. Gary is preceded in death by his parents, brother Douglas, and daughter Mary Kathleen. Survivors include his wife Terry Jo, sister Darlene Peterson, 6 children, 13 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. Pardon me for being gimpy around here. I just got a new left main gear. They replaced my hip just a few weeks ago. So at some point, I might even have to sit down. I wouldn't miss this. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it through it. But I'll try, and that's not because of my hip. It's because of my emotions. Gary called me a puddle pirate. That's all right. I called him a missile pilot. Gary and I have been friends for a lot of years. Since somewhere back in the 1980s, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. We've been friends. We've worked together. I ran into him wherever I turned. Every organization I was a member of, there was Gary. I've been to Oshkosh more times with Gary than any other person I can recall. In fact, I got to tell a story about that. Gary and I, well, I don't think we've ever slept on the ground at Oshkosh, and I've got a few friends in the audience today that I know sleep on the ground at Oshkosh every year. I just can't do the heat, and I can't do the worms and the bugs and things like that. So when Gary and I went, well, we were working together, and we would usually be in a group and we rented a house somewhere. I couldn't even stand the upper stories. I slept in the basement where it was cool. I don't do heat that very well, and Gary used to give me a hard time. One time he found me sleeping under a pool table because that was the only place in the basement there was room for me to sleep. Well, after the little company finally dissolved that he and I worked for, it had been a couple of years, and I called him up and I said, Gary, I said, it's about time we went to Oshkosh again. And so we got together, and Tom, that's our videographer over here on the side today, Tom said, oh, I'd like to go to Oshkosh. So we went, we roughed it. We really roughed it. We did camp out in Tom's Airstream trailer. It was a tough way to go for a week, but somebody had to do it. Tom even found us a place on the grounds at Oshkosh, a private campground on the grounds at Oshkosh, and the T-28s woke us up every morning. Can you imagine? Gary and I were in heaven. It was absolutely the most incredible thing. I mean, after we'd been spending, well, we had to drive 45 minutes from a house to get to the grounds at Oshkosh for years before that. And here we were on the grounds in an Airstream. Well, a couple of years after that, I hadn't seen Gary at Oshkosh for a while. I called him up and I said, Gary, I've got a place to stay if you'd like to go. And he said, I'd love to go. So we made plans, and in fact, he took his car, a little red car, and we headed to Oshkosh. He says, now where are we staying? I said, well, I've got some friends that are freight dogs. They work for Federal Express, and one of them has a house about a quarter of a mile off center line on 1836 at Oshkosh. He said, freight dogs? Yeah, I said, a bunch of freighter pilots for FedEx. I didn't tell him the whole story. By the way, can I talk you into getting me a chair? I'm starting to get a little weak here. I'm only a few weeks out of surgery here for my left main gears. Thank you. So the closer we got to Oshkosh, I told Gary a little bit more about this. He says, now where are we going to sleep? I said, I told you to bring a sleeping bag. I didn't tell him he was going to sleep in the owner's study, and that she had a home that was probably the best seat in the house for the night air show. I wanted to leave a little bit, you know, as we got along and when we got there to find out. And he says, a bunch of freighter pilots. I said, yeah, freight dogs, you know. When we got there, we pulled in. Nobody was home yet. I had the combination to the garage door. And we walked in, he looked around, he says, this place is beautiful. I said, yeah, she takes really good care of it. He says, you keep saying she. I said, yeah, she's a captain here at FedEx. And I said, a lot of her friends will be here, so we're going to be in a lot of company. And there was a sign, and it said, the beer's in the refrigerator, and the food's in the refrigerator and in the cabinets, and feel free. I'll be in on Tuesday night. Can you come get me at Appleton? And then her friend, I can't even think of her friend's name off the top of my head now, will be here Wednesday night, and the rest of them are coming Thursday. And everybody stays till Sunday, and we all go shooting on Sunday. And he keeps saying, she. I said, well, yeah, I left that part out. Most of the freight dogs here are women. Now, I hadn't told my wife, sitting in the front row here, when I went to Oshkosh every year, that I was staying in a house full of women. And he made the first observation. It was the same observation my wife made when I took her the first time 2 years ago. There's not a dog in the house. And that was the first thing Gary said. He said, these women are all beautiful. I said, well, you don't have to be ugly to be a pilot. Of course, Gary and I exemplified that. So he was pleasantly surprised to find out that I didn't have to sleep on the ground with the worms and the bugs or anything else when we went to Oshkosh. I told you, he called me a puddle pirate. I spent 26 years in the Coast Guard. And not that there was any inter-service rivalry between Gary and I or any of the rest of you in MOAA or TROA or whatever the name is now. But Gary was always a friend. As soon as I met him, Gary was a friend. And we found out we both had many things in common. We were both pilots. We were both members of Missouri Pilots Association. If you look at that list of accomplishments on the back of the flyer that you've got in front of you, it's absolutely incredible the number of organizations that Gary was in and past president of, past commander of, area representative for, and anybody that loves people and loves flying the way he did, it's not surprising at all to find that kind of list of accomplishments in his life. Now, I've got some things where I'm going to be serious, and I'm probably going to lose it, so that's why I'm kind of starting out lighthearted. By the way, he used to give me an awful time about being a puddle pirate, and one time we got in these Tri-Pacer, and we were getting ready to start it up, and I said, now you're qualified in this. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean? I said, well, I know what you did in the Air Force. And I said, you are a missile pilot. I said, I thought you had to have a payload on one end and a rocket engine on the other. He says, you keep talking like that, you could end up being the payload. He also had an annoying habit. He used to ride with me when we worked for this little company in Lee Summit, when I drove the truck that had 2 airplanes in the back, and we would go everywhere. We'd go to Oshkosh, we'd go down to Florida to 2 or 3 different places. We'd go out to Copper State in Arizona, wherever it was we were heading to. Gary always volunteered to ride with me. I had the CDL. And as soon as we got in the truck, boy, his eyes closed and he was asleep. And we were leaving one time going to Oshkosh and just almost out of North Kansas City, Liberty, headed up toward Des Moines. And we were driving in a bunch of orange barrels. And that's when he finally went to sleep. I thought, wow, he made it for 40 minutes. I was pretty impressed. And 3 hours later, he woke up in Iowa and we were in a bunch of orange barrels. He said, Fred, what have you been doing? We haven't gotten very far. Some days you couldn't win. His sense of humor was rough. It was just rough sometimes. And I learned to love it. But we've got one truck that had an air ride seat. Now, I don't know how many people have ever ridden in a big truck with an air ride seat, but it really is nice. It takes all the bumps out of the road, except for this one came from Penske, and they forgot to put the shock absorbers on the seat. So when I sat down the first time, in fact, we got in the thing in Lee Summit and headed towards Florida, and we were in St. Louis when I hit the first big bump. And it shot me up and my head hit the ceiling, and of course that shot me straight back down, so then my knees are in front of me and put me back up. I did that for at least 15 seconds, and Gary grabbed the wheel because I couldn't hold on to anything, and he said, Fred, grab the wheel. I'm laughing so hard I can't see where we're going. So like I say, sometimes his sense of humor left a little bit to be desired there. I want to go through some of the things here, because Gary and I riding together. We did get in a 140 one time, and we were going to taxi it over to our booth at an air show. And when we got in and started it up, he said, Fred, he says, do you have a tail wheel endorsement? Of course, I used the old line from the movie, tail wheel endorsement. I'm sorry for you that aren't aviators, you may miss this. I said, I I don't got no tail wheel endorsement. I don't need no stinking tail wheel endorsement. And he finally figured out what I was saying, because if you're old enough, that's what you learned to fly in anyway. You didn't need a tail wheel endorsement. So now I'm going to try and get a little serious. Like I said, if you look at all these accomplishments, I'm going to read some of them to you that aren't even on the back there. Bear with me a little bit. He joined the Air Force in 1955. And 2 years later, he was an instructor teaching electronics in a missile school. Now, a lot of people here have been in the military. 2 years later, he was an instructor in the missile school teaching electronics. That's almost incredible. But you know why? He was doing what he loved. He was doing what he loved. He found something that really turned him on. And almost all the things he did in life were things that he loved. And that's why he did them well. Okay, that started in 52. 2 years later, he was an instructor. I found out that in 1955, he became staff sergeant. That's 4 years. There's an awful lot of Air Force guys in here. I know guys that have been in the Air Force 12, 14 years that make staff sergeant. And I think they're a little bit slower than some of the other branches, but holy moly, he did that in 4 years. I'm impressed. In 1960, he took a giant leap. He took a leap of faith. The Air Force took a leap of faith. He went to OCS, and he made it. Yeah, he had some hard times in OCS, but he made it. And for those of us in the military, that means he was a Mustang. You know what that means? That means he had the power and the authority. He'd been an enlisted guy. He knew the ways that the military worked. Now he was an officer. And I recognized some things when he and I would talk on those long trips, usually in the truck because his airplane was awfully noisy. But we had a lot of long talks. And I asked him some things about how and why he made the rise to stardom he did in the military. And I found out we had a few more things in common. How many people here, especially those of you in military or those of you that have been captains of industry, have heard of the situational leadership situation? It's the little square that has S1 through S4 in it. And they teach you, depending upon the people you're dealing with and the situations you're dealing with, which one of those is the best form of leadership. I thought I was the only guy that remembered that stuff, and Gary could tell me all about it. If you've ever seen the movie 12 O'Clock High, it exemplifies that between the first scene, the first commanding officer, and the last commanding officer. Gary learned a lot from that. I don't know if he learned that in the military or learned that when he was at UNO, but he knew all about that. How many people here have ever heard of Dr. Morris Massey? He wrote a book and later on a video called Chalk Talk. And Morris Massey said, what you are is what you were when you were about 12 to 14 years old. Anybody ever heard of that? I don't know. It's just Dr. Massey's Chalk Talk was the video I first saw. Then I started checking everything out. Gary could tell me all about that. You know why? Because he made friends, and when he made friends, he found out as much as he could about those people, and that helped him understand the difference between the generations. And I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from that both in the military and in college, and I was really surprised to find somebody else that did. So that meant a lot to me. I'm going to keep going, get back on this now. He made Major in 1970. That's 5 years after he made Captain. That's 10 years after he made Second Lieutenant. That's moving right along there. He got selected each time. I'm pretty impressed. Before he retired in 1975, he graduated from the University of Omaha, University of Nebraska at Omaha, and then he retired a year later. When I take a look at the timelines, I can't help but be impressed. And his career working with electronics and missiles led him to learning about computers, because that was one of the first areas where computers, because you got to face it, even though I called him a missile pilot, they don't have one, they had computers. And that's where Gary got interested in computers. His second love became, at that point, at least for a vocation, the computers that controlled the missiles. And that's what led him to his career after he retired. So in 1975, he retired. I take a look at what he did at University of Nebraska. He was a student leader at the University of Nebraska. He was an instructor when he was just 2 years in the Air Force. He was a leader, and as a leader and a Mustang officer in the Air Force, he did know the difference between power and authority and used both of them to his advantage and the advantage of those that worked with him and for him. He was also recognized for that by those that were over him. As a civilian, he used that leadership training as well as his technical training to operate his company successfully for over 20 years. As a retiree, he continued in the leadership positions in all of those organizations that are on the back of that flyer that you've got in front of you. And some of those, well, this organization, a lot of people are here today, Missouri Pilots, retired officers, MOAA, all of the organizations that he was in. The Military Order of World Wars, Board of Aeronautical Commissioners in Lee Summit, he was a past chair of that. AOPA, area representative for that. He was members of 2 flying clubs, and he rose to leadership positions with those 2 flying clubs. By the way, as a retired college professor, you need to know this is going to take 50 minutes and then there will be a quiz. Now, here's the thing. Here's a kid from Tonawanda High School in Buffalo, New York. Joined the Air Force with a high school education, and look at the accomplishments he made. How did he do that? How in the world did he do that? Well, he was a good leader, there's no question about that. He treated everyone with respect. He treated, in my opinion, everyone like family. He earned the respect of those around him, probably because he treated them all like family. When he was an enlisted man, he said he always made sure that the new guys that showed up, he would help them to make rank as soon as they could, because he said that's important, especially when the military paid you what they did back in the 1950s and the 1960s. We've all, well, many of us have been there. He was helpful to everyone, his people that he worked with, people in his personal life, and people that he tried to help get advanced in the military. He never stopped learning. I know that I was kind of surprised that Major Fox helped me with an engine overhaul. I'm going to say about probably 5 years ago on an experimental engine that we got from Lycoming Aircraft. And we had to run it, tear it down, inspect it, overhaul it, put it all back together. And he was kind of surprised when we made him fly behind it. But he never quit learning, and I thought, gee, that's pretty good for the major to help overhaul an engine. He surrounded himself with those that had similar goals, ambitions, and loves. And as I said earlier, he had a sense of humor, even if sometimes it was a little bit rough. He considered his friends to be special, like family. You're here today because he considered you a friend. That means you're special, like family. That says a lot about Gary. That says a lot about you. So in conclusion, fly west, my friend. Your contrails will be ever visible to us, your friends, and your family. General True, you're on.
Our mic is down there, General True. Our mic is down there. There's one right there, right in front of the podium.
Yeah, that needs to go back home, I'm sorry.
Well, there's not a whole lot I can add to that. Is this thing still on? All right, thank you. I first met Gary over 25 years ago. It was at what was then a Retired Officers Association of a meeting out at Richards Gabar Air Force Base Officers Club. Gary was just completing the second year of his first term as the president of that club. I found Gary a real easy person to get to know. He was a real fun guy. But I was later to learn that he could have a serious side as well. And always had a smile on his face and a good story to tell. Everybody hear this okay? No? It's not coming through? Okay. Maybe I just need to hold it. Terry related a story to me about when he was looking to buy a home when he arrived in this area. And she said he bought the house basically sight unseen, because when somebody told him that the house was near the airport, he said, "I'll take it," without ever having seen the inside of the house. Gary loved to fly, and as his health issues got so that he could barely walk, he would say, "But I can still fly." Eventually, that even had to come to an end. In most organizations, there's usually just a handful or two of members who actually make the organization run. And Gary, along with Terry Joe, was always among that few to step up and do whatever is necessary for the organization. And you've heard all of the things that were mentioned that he did, being president of all these different organizations and so forth. And over time, excuse me, Gary was a major player in almost every organization to which he belonged. If it were not for Gary, many of these organizations just wouldn't make it. He was that important. Well, today our hearts are heavy, but we should be rejoicing and be thankful for the years that he was given to us. Gary always gave of himself for the betterment of others. And for those of us whose lives he touched, we're all the better for it. Gary will be greatly missed for who he was and what he did, but most of all, we're going to miss him because he was a friend. Thank you.
Marvin Moore is our next speaker.
If I can get this microphone up here a little bit. I'll slide this up here just a little bit and cover my face so you don't have to see that. Maybe I won't. Who'd you say the technical person was? Tom? All right. Yeah, I can do that. We'll just pick it up and hold it. I'm used to giving presentations and picking the mic up, so. Well, I want to thank you, Terry Joe, for inviting me over, and the family and friends, and my condolences where Gary is concerned. My name is Marvin Moore. I've known the family for over 30 years now. And Gary is very instrumental in a lot of things that I've done over the last 30 years. And where I'd like to start off with is he loved to fly. He was the president or past president of the Wing Flying Club, as well as the Metro Flying Club out there in Lee Summit. And he and I flew the airplanes out there together. I'll get to some of the fun stories here shortly, but the where I met him at was, I was an instructor at Lee Summit for a number of years, and he had a computer company, Foxware Computer. Obviously, David worked over there, and I think somewhere along the line, everybody worked there, did they not? But that's being funny, but nonetheless, I approached him. I wanted to buy a computer because I needed to keep track of my records. And he said, well, come look at some computers. I got all various kinds and models and prices. And I said, well, will you give me a good price on one? He just smiled. Of course, me, I'm always trying to Jew people a lower price, you know, so I can get a good deal. So we talked about a computer a little bit, and we settled on a computer. And he was willing to finance me, if you will, have a payment plan. I didn't have to do that, but you know, it was on the table there if I wanted it. So he fixed me up with a computer. Today, you know, the computer is probably, for the speed and everything, is well antiquated, but you know, at the time it was, you know, $1,500. I could afford it. So I bought it. And I said, I remember this distinctly. I said, so do I get a monitor? No, you have to buy a monitor. And he said, and I said, how about a keyboard and mouse? He says, oh, we throw that in, no charge. Okay. But with that, I started flying with him. Now, he got the Tri-Pacer. I don't remember what year he got it, but he got it sometime after. But started flying with him in the club's airplanes, doing instrument training. And for all of you that are out here, pilots, know what the instrument rating is, that type of thing. I don't do well behind podiums. I had my right main gear replaced here a couple of years back. Did you say it was your left?
Left, yeah.
But, so anyway, we started flying together. And Gary would get in that airplane, and we talked, we pre-fly, we did all the necessary work. We'd get in there, we'd fly. He did a really good job on flying. Now, he was getting his instrument rating, mind you, so he had to be under the Fockles. And we'd be flying, doing the approaches. When we got proficient, or he got proficient on his flying, you know, straight and level, climb to the stance term, and so forth, under the hood. We got into the instrument work, doing the ILSs, or the instrument landing system. There's a localizer for your guidance, left and right, and the glide slope for your up and down. I swear, we'd get on that glide slope, and his feet would dance on those rudder pedals down there, and he would not get his feet off. He'd constantly be doing this, wagging the tail all the way down. So I finally told him, I said, Gary, I said, take your feet off the rudders. Why? I said, because you're driving me nuts and you're making me sick. Well, I don't understand, Mark. I said, just put your feet on the floor. Because the localizer needle would be tracking, you know, 15 degrees one way and 15 degrees the next. And so we got to the point where I had my feet on the rudders, and we came down it pretty good. He could do the glide slope. That was not a problem. You know, power off, power on, not a problem on that. So we got him moving forward on that. Transitioned to getting his feet on the rudders. And he started doing pretty good with that, which was great. I was happy. I commended him. I think it was a wonderful thing for that. And moving on up, I'm going to go up a little bit and come back. Back in 1969, my folks had a grass strip down by Centerview, Missouri. At the time, it was still a dirt strip. They had some friends from Omaha, Nebraska, and this gentleman, Muggs Norris, was in the Air Force, and he had a 1959 Tri-Pacer. He flew that into my dad's. I started to bring the pictures, but I didn't know if I could bring them up. But anyway, so he flew that into my dad's the dirt strip at the time, 1,300 feet. Landed. That was the second airplane ride I ever had in my life, because my dad was a pilot. And Muggs took me up in that airplane. Tri-Pacer, first time in one. And then Gary got his airplane out there, and we were talking about it, and he was all concerned, have you ever flown one of these? And I did get time in the Tri-Pacers, probably somewhere, 200 hours or so. But before we flew. But so he looked at me. We went out to pre-flight before we went to fly, and he's very, very serious about it. Have you ever flown a tri-pacer, Marvin? And I looked at him and I said, no. Oh my God. Yeah, Gary was. Well, what do we need to do? And I said, well, let's just go out and fly it. Okay, we went through the pre-flight, detail by detail by detail. He knew what he was doing. There's no question about that there. But he didn't know that I knew what he was doing, so I played devil's advocate there a little bit. So we flew, did some instrument training. He said, you want to fly? And I said, sure, I flew it. And, 20,000 hour pilot, I did okay with it. We got back down and he looked at me. We sat in the cockpit there for a minute. He says, you're lying to me. I said, what do you mean? He says, you've flown these damn things before. And I told him the story. And indeed, he was excellent. That airplane he loved. There's no question about that. He loves the people that, at Lee Summit, everywhere in the world, everybody he touched or came in contact with, they would have something to say about Gary. There's no question in my mind about that. So moving on a little bit further, Red Robin is a restaurant over here. I'm sure people have been there. And before I came to work at the FAA, and that's another story, when Red Robin opened, myself, Gary, Penrod Turk, I don't know if anybody else was there that day. I don't know if you were there, Terry Joe, but I think it was just the three of us. They wanted to go over to Red Robin and eat because we'd go all over. There was Everett's over there by Lakewood and other places, that we'd eat lunch at. But we did it pretty regularly, like every Friday. So we got over there to Red Robin to open it up, or when it would open up. And of course, Gary and his clam chowder, that's what he loved the most. We sat down there and I learned more about the Air Force in the years that we spent there than I ever knew, even though I have two brothers that were, Denny and Mike, that were retired as far as Air Force. But so we'd sit many, many hours, many days, meet over there every week, and friends would come over. A lot of times he'd invite people. His sense of humor was just like Fred said. It was funny. He'd be serious sometimes. And let me tell you what, if you didn't know what you're talking about, he'd call you on it. No question about that. You couldn't BS him. So the Red Robin experience, I'd been flight instructing. I was a pilot examiner at Lee Summit. I give Gary a lot of flight reviews over the years. I think the most memorable one is when I pulled the mixture on him and said, what are you going to do with it? Kill the engine. He did fine with it. But it made him nervous all the way back because he thought I was going to do it again because he heard the war stories about me shutting the fuel off. I did that pretty regularly, whether I was flying in a twin or doing it in a single engine. I'm a helicopter pilot as well. I never could get him to go up with me in a helicopter. I don't know if he was scared of me or scared of the helicopter. And I know there's a few heli guys out here and gals. But the tail wheel stuff, in the Pacer, on the conventional gear, the tri-Pacer, once they were in the air, those airplanes flew pretty good. I think the clip wing Pacer was probably kind of like a clip wing Cub, but they made some modifications, went to the experimental category, but that's kind of an oddball flying airplane. Red Robin, there was a young lady there, Crystal was her name, and by golly, if Gary didn't get Crystal as the waitress, he really, he could have cared whether he stayed there for lunch or not. It was Crystal or Crystal. Am I correct on that, Harry?
I don't know. She was just his girl.
She was his girl, yeah. And this gal, she may be here today, I don't know, but this gal knew exactly what everybody wanted every time we went in there, and it was endless fries, and Gary could eat the fries. Oh my God, he ate 2, 3 bowls of fries, and you've been over there too, Fred, I'm sure. And but so in 2005, Gary started picking on me. He says, you know, Marv, you've been out here flying, you've done this, you flew charter, you've done, you know, you worked at EB, but so forth and so on. He says, you ever thought about going to work for the FAA? And I kind of looked him in the eye and said, sort of. I said, I don't think I qualify. And he said, well, look into it. So it was between him and Penrod Turk and Paul Broom, if anybody remembers Broom, Cadillac and Knowles up there. So one day we got together, they wanted to talk to me, we got together and said, why don't you go to work for the FAA? Why don't you put an application in? I said, okay. So I did that, and I was referred in their system and talked to Rich Carlson, was the manager's name at the time, and he wanted, you know, some more referrals. Gary wrote me a nice letter, as did Penrod, and Paul. I think probably the most thankful thing I have with Gary is his referring me in confidence. I'm getting like you, Fred. Sorry. But the confidence he had in me and all the crap that I gave him over the years was pretty phenomenal. And he hung in there with me, or I hung in there with him. I'm not sure which it was, and I think Terry probably whispered in his ear, he'll be okay, Marvin. I mean, he'll be okay, Gary. Marvin will be okay. She stood her ground pretty good. So with that being said, he, Paul Broom, and Penrod Turk had a meeting with Rich Carlson and Ron Myers, who was their frontline manager there at the downtown, actually they're up on Tiffany Springs. So they all ganged up over at, I shouldn't say gang, they all met over at Paul's place there in Independence. And you know, I know for a fact if it wasn't for those guys sitting together in the conference there at Paul's place, I probably wouldn't be with the FAA today. I'm not here to be the FAA. I noticed my name had FAA by it, and yes, I am an employee. It's been my career for almost 20 years now. But they were very instrumental in that. 2 weeks after that, I got a firm offer letter. Went and did my flight checks, and we'll fast forward to 2006. So the spring of 2006, I got a firm letter, looked at it, accepted it, went and did my flight checks down in Oklahoma and in Texas. And eventually I was given the position there as a principal operation. Actually, it was an aviation safety inspector, not a principal operation at the time. But he gave me, a lot of insight where the government was concerned. He said, you get in there, stick with it. He says, and you'll be happy. And he's right. I'm very content with what I do. I've moved up in the ranks a little bit. I'm doing the Fast Team Program Manager job now, and have been for a number of years. I've come here and given many safety meeting speeches, and not too many of them have been missed by Gary. They may have been doing something at the time, but let's see here. So as I say, my thank you for him, for what he has done for me career-wise. Another part of Gary is my son, Joe Moore. He went to Blue Springs High School over there, and he was looking at going to colleges. And he was like number 3, not salutatory, but he was number 3 in the class over there. Graduated. And Gary and Joe, Gary rode in the back of the airplane. That wouldn't happen. But Joe would ride in the back of the airplane as a tot, and him and Gary developed a really good relationship, as with Terry Joe as well. And Joe applied for scholarships with the Air Force Academy, West Point, and Merchant Marine is what it was. And we went and interviewed at all those places. Gary gave him some letters as well. Sam Graves, who is the congressman for the district at the time, over there, still is up there, but he went through the process, and as I say, Gary helped with that process to get the application moving forward. And we went, and Joe's vision wasn't the best, but we did get an interview over at the Colorado Springs at the Air Force. They turned him down because his vision wasn't what he needed. For all you Air Force guys, he wanted to be a pilot. He was a pilot. And then we went over to West Point. My grandfather and great-great-grandfather graduated from West Point, and John Creedmoor, but went there, and they looked at him, they were interested, but finally we went to Queens on Long Island there at the Kings Point, and they accepted him, and he got a full-ride scholarship there, so he graduated from the Merchant Marine Academy in 2014 and served with the Navy for 8 years. Not the Coast Guard, not the Air Force, but the Navy. But so he was very instrumental in that, and he's meant a lot to me over the years. He's been a friend, a confidant. He's there, and I thank him for his service. He has gone west, and he was great. And for everybody in here that served, I thank you personally on that as well. One final thing is, everybody knows the government works slow. Gary, even though he didn't qualify on the number of years for a Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award, we looked at that, and I looked at it as well posthumously, but we looked at that. So he missed out on the years and time. You have to have 50 years. So I reviewed his record, talked about it. Officially, I can't give him a Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award, but what I have done is I've implored the management, and I am going to, it's been ordered, I got the authorization to provide a blue ribbon package as what you would receive for or with the Wright Brothers. And I'm going to provide some letters as well to Terry Jo and the family. So from the FAA standpoint, that's what I have done and what I'm going to offer. And he's well deserving of that. And I want to thank everybody and offering me the time to speak. Give that back to you.
Darlene Peterson. Darlene.
Is that okay? Thank you. Could I hold it? Yeah, just hold it. Okay. Hi, I'm Darlene Peterson. I am Gary's baby sister. Gary and I were 11 years difference in age, and I think hearing everybody talk about his sense of humor, trust me, I have seen his sense of humor over the years, many times. I really didn't write anything. I just thought I'd kind of go with what came to me. And when I was born, my mom was Canadian, my dad was American, and I had 2 older brothers, Gary, and then another brother 19 years older. And my family moved to Canada and opened a toboggan company there. And my mom, who, like I said, was Canadian, after I was born, she used to bundle me all up and put me in her pram outside when it was 20 below zero. And Gary used to say, oh, she's going to freeze to death. So every time I run into Gary, over the years, he always has to bring that up. And so this last September, we were just here. We had a family reunion, which I'm blessed I was at. And he told the story to everybody again. And I said, so I've always wondered, why did you not take me in? And if you've ever heard Gary laugh, You know, like his sense of humor. Well, I thought maybe you'd freeze to death if they left you out there long enough. But that was just kind of his way in how he dealt. I loved him forever. I think about another time. Both Gary and I are sports addicts. We liked football, and Gary, of course, was Kansas City Chiefs, and my husband and I, we live in Denver, so we're Bronco fans. So, and of course, there's such rivalries. So every time there was a game, we would connect back and forth on the phone. And if Denver was winning, of course, I would call and say, what's wrong with your Chiefs, you know, and then if it was the other way. So the thing I remember is there was a game, it's been a few years ago, when they were going for the playoffs, and the game was between Denver and Kansas City. And we pretty much had it bagged. Denver was going to win it, and I was all excited, and I was giving Gary all kinds of grief on the phone. And then all of a sudden, the Broncos fumbled, Kansas City recovered, and they won and went to the champions. So my phone rings. Well, I know exactly who's on that phone, and I'm not wanting to answer it. So I thought, well, I'll just ignore it. No, he just kept calling. So I picked up the phone and I said, I'm sorry, the number you have reached is out of service. Please leave a message, and maybe we'll. He goes, no, it's not out of service. So I mean, that's just kind of the things with Gary. He was older, and both my brothers were, so I don't have a lot of experience. He went into the Air Force out of high school and did a lot of traveling, and got married and had 7 beautiful children. I don't have a whole lot of other stories, just that I just want to say that Gary loved Jesus, and Gary loved his family, and he loved his country. And I am blessed to know that one day I will see him again.
That ends our scheduled speakers. Terry also wanted me to invite anybody else who had anything to say to come forward.
Caroline Gillis. Fox.
So, after he fell and he was in the hospital, I had just seen him about 2 or 3 weeks before he had the accident. And I was, I'm a substitute, and I was working, and I was upset because I couldn't go back up to see him again. And a friend of mine, a coworker, told me to just write down every good memory that you had of him, and I came up with 12 pages. And my family member said, "You're not going to read all that, are you?" I said, "No, I'm just going to hit the highlights." So I'm the third person, child in the family. There's the oldest, my brother, and then a sister, Susan, and then me. And I'm the only left-handed daughter in the family, and I have wavy hair, and I have hazel eyes like him. And one day he told me that I looked the most like him out of all the children. And I was at work one day, and there was a custodian that was there, and he was just a temporary custodian. He said, "Well, I like the way you walk." And I said, "Well, guess what? I walk just like my dad." And so here's a few memories that I have of him. I wanted to thank him for joining the Air Force and giving us all a good life. We saw so many places we would not have seen if you had not been in the military. I love the fact that I know Spanish because we were stationed in Spain. I remember a hairy arm that was the tooth fairy. I know it was you, but all I told you was that the tooth fairy had a very hairy arm. I eat my steak medium rare after I heard you order it one day in a restaurant. I know I got my wave in my hair and my eye color from you. You gave me the gift of being left-handed. We are unique. I remember my first airplane ride by myself. It was on 7/7/1977. You picked me up from the airport. I remember we were going to eat breakfast before I boarded the plane, and I forgot my ticket. I think you drove about 100 miles an hour to get my ticket and get me to the airport on time. Needless to say, we did not get breakfast. One year, he worked for Radio Shack after he retired, and he was so excited because the store next door to him had half a Christmas tree, and we didn't have a Christmas tree, and it was one of my siblings and I that lived with him at the time. So he brought home half a Christmas tree and leaned it up against the wall, and it kept falling down, which made it even funnier. And like they said, he does have a little bit of a warped sense of humor, and one of his favorite memories of me is I was visiting after I graduated from high school, and I was visiting, and when he says it's 12 o'clock, it's 12 o'clock, that's the curfew. Well, you know, I'm out on my own, so I don't have to follow that. Well, one night I got locked out of the house because I came home after midnight, and I was so cold. This is in January or December. I put my mittens on my feet because I was so cold. And I walked to the neighbor's house to call. And when I answered the door, I looked like a penguin crying with brown mittens on my feet. And he just stood there laughing, looking at me because I was sure I was quite a sight. And that's one of his favorite memories. He says every time we see each other. He also liked a bargain, and he had a great idea of buying a case of Mexican dinners. Now, in the 80s, the frozen dinners were made with tin. The containers were. We had Mexican dinners for months. I can still taste the tinny taste to the dinners. I rarely buy frozen Mexican dinners meal after being burned out on those. I remember you buying those delicious donuts for us when we came to visit Missouri. He told me, I'm divorced, and he told me that my picker was broken. And if I got married again, he would come down to Texas and he would spank me if I got married again. And I remember when I moved out after I graduated from high school, I couldn't decide whether or not to stay. And so he shipped my stuff to me, and then I shipped it back. And then he shipped it back to me. And it worked out in hindsight because I ended up going to college there in Abilene. And 2 years ago I had a car accident, and I was looking for a car to get, and he recommended a Kia Soul because he had one. And so now when I drive the car, it brings good memories of him. We had 7 children, okay? And he had to have an Opel GT car, which is a 2-seater. So it was a privilege when one of us got to ride in it because no other sibling would be riding in it. And I thought it was cool when you dropped me off at school in that car. I loved how the lights flipped around. And he was there for my high school graduation, my college graduation, and he walked me down the aisle for my wedding. And when I was preparing for my wedding, I was getting some simple decorations, and he told me he needed to upgrade because it wasn't good enough. And then he told me that I didn't have to marry the person I married, that we would just have a big party, but if I didn't if I had not gotten married, I would not have the two beautiful children I have now. I remember I was upset at work, and so he taught me a phrase, foobar. And he said, when things are really bad in life, just remember that, and it will, everything will be okay. And then he told me what foobar meant. He said, it's an Air Force term. And I said, okay. He said, just don't say it at work. And I have a little Red Robin story. When I was down here, we were getting ready to go, take me to the airport. And we went to eat at Red Robin. And I learned about the French fries at Red Robin's that he loved. And so we had different kinds. And I had one of my siblings with me, and it had been his birthday a few days ago, and so I snuck and got a dessert and had someone sing for him. And when they were singing for my brother, I just picked up the phone and I put it on record, and I got my dad clapping and laughing. And that was the last time I saw him. And when I was getting out of the car at the airport, I knew I had to just give him a little hug. And I kept patting on his shoulder, and he just smiled at me and his little smirk. And I thought, I'm never going to see you again. And I will always remember him at Red Robin laughing and clapping his hands. And I have him on recording. And you lived a wonderful life and had many careers, and I'm proud to call you my dad. Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Come on up, sir. Ready?
For those who don't know me, I'm Floyd Dedeker, and I'm president of the Missouri Pilots Association. And been privileged to work with Gary and Terry Jo for, I think, the 25 years I've been a part of the association. And I looked up our records, and I think they've been members of the Missouri Pilots Association for 32 years. And I also looked up, and of all the different positions that Gary held, and I think that he had about every position that was available in the chapter level and the state level as well. Can't say too much about Gary's military career because I didn't know him at that point in time, but I'd like to express a few things about him and the Missouri Pilots Association. Gary was my mentor. He was probably the first one with any of the officers with the Missouri Pilots Association to congratulate me as becoming a member back in 1998. There was other people such as Jan Hoyenacke, Jim Morris, Bob Crandall, Dan Gilbert, Bill Cheek, Hubert Looney, Gary Johnson, and Ron Wade that inspired me, but anything that Gary had to say, I listened. Because if Gary said it was a fact, it was a fact. And so I grabbed on right quick. I think that he was probably the major person in getting me engulfed in the presidential position with the Missouri Pilots Association. And in every meeting we ever had, he'd always say, hey, you're doing a good job. And so if he told me I was doing a good job, I felt like, yes, I was doing a pretty good job. The Missouri Pilots Association is a much more fruitful organization today because of Gary and, of course, Terry Joe's input. They were an inspiration in every one of our state board meetings. And if Gary ever thought that an idea that was brought forward before the state board was not a good idea, he would tell them it's not a good idea. And I'd probably say 95% of the time, by the time that Gary got finished, the board agreed it wasn't a good idea. And so he was inspirational in a lot of things that went on with the Missouri Pilots Association. As I said before, he held about every executive board job position that was there, including the vice president at his passing. He was the state president for 2 years while I was the state treasurer, and I can say that there was more things accomplished in that 2 years than has been accomplished since. I think that he's done a great job in fulfilling the positions that he's had. He's been a great influence to the Missouri Pilots Association, and we will miss him. We will miss him greatly. We hope that we can convince Terry to continue with the board. She's been a board member for 32 years, I assume, something like that. So we hope that we can keep her with us. And representing the Board of Directors for the Missouri Pilots Association, we want to express our condolences to Terry and the family, and we will have Gary and his family in our prayers forever. Thank you.
Anyone else? I would now like to, we're going to change speeds a little bit, and I would like to introduce you to our chapter commander for some words, Anna McDonald.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Anna McDonald. I am the commander for the chapter of the DAV Veterans of Chapter 2 of Kansas City, Missouri. First, and on behalf of the DAV Chapter 2, I would like to extend our condolence to the Fox family and thank them for inviting us to pay our final respect to our fallen member. Comrades and friends, our Supreme Commander has seen fit to call another of our comrades to answer the final roll call. For the first thousands of veterans who served in time of conflict and who, like our comrade laying here before us, suffered disabilities as a result of their service. A war never ends until the merciful God sees fit to call them to their eternal reward. No one knows the full extent of their physical suffering. Few realize the economy handicap they have been forced to endure during the many long years that they have been paying the price of their patriotism. Perhaps we members of the DAV disabled veterans from our own experience and close contact of the suffering of our comrades can be understood by force of death that brings a large console. For surely a merciful and just God could not do another than provide a life of future happiness for our departed comrade. For the many trials and tribulations he endured here on earth. It is this thought that gives us the courage and marks our comrade passing without tears, securing in the knowledge that he is not dead, but rather he has gone on to something better than he happened moments on earth, and that he has been discharged from this earthly army and accepted to serve glorious army of the host of heaven, where we may hopefully endure to join him eternal peace. Comrades, and in the following, after the chaplain and I, please join us in saluting our farewell comrade of Gary Fox.
Well, I'm a little lost now. I've been a military chaplain for about 18 years, and I think this is the first time I've ever been really at a loss for words. But I really don't know what I could say about my friend Terry Fox that hadn't already been said in the growing accolades of all his friends and family who have already spoken for him. So instead of that, I would like to tell you maybe a little bit about the final time I saw Gary. He was in the hospital. And I can guarantee all of you that Gary was at right with his Lord. I know he was surrounded by family, friends, and loved ones. I know he had people praying for him when he passed. And if you've got to go, I can't think of a much better way to go, and I couldn't agree with his sister more. I know that we're going to see him sometime when we do our final passing. I have something that Terry found that she found interesting, and I would like to read it before I go into my final prayer. May the Lord our God bless us all present here to memorize Gary and those who lived and died to preserve liberty and freedom of our nation and in the world. And may the Lord our God remember all those who sacrificed, gave this nation its greatest progress and riches. May our memory of all those who served in the armed forces be an honorable one, full of thanks to the Lord, and remember with much love and mercy those who died in the service of our country, whether in the air or on the land or on the sea. Be with us all, provide mercy till we return to our homes. Amen. Now I would ask for all of us to bow our heads in prayer to a loving and caring Father. O Lord our God, whose days are without end, and whose mercy is everlasting, you are the refuge of our souls, the strength of our lives, and our portion forever. We come to you, we trust in you. Let us not be confounded nor dismayed. God of battles, author of peace, as our comrade departs to be with you and we march forward with broken ranks, help us to be faithful to their memory and loyal to the spirit that animated them. Help us to perpetuate their memory by noble consecration to their ideals. In comradeship, loyalty, and devotion, may we continue to be worthy of their sacred memory. O Lord, in your goodness and mercy, grant unto the bereaved family and friends comfort and consolation. Prepare, O God, we pray you, in our minds and hearts for a life with all its trials and tribulations and responsibilities, for death with all its mystery and solemnity. And bring us finally through your grace into the reunited comradeship of everlasting life in a world without end. In your holy name we pray. Amen. I would ask that my comrades come forward, and that anyone who has served in the military, if you would like to join us in our final salute to our friend Terry Fox, you are more than welcome to join us.
That concludes our ceremony for the day. Thank you, everyone. Please stay and have a bite to eat with us, and we can converse a little more closely. Thank you. God love all of you.